Welcome to Case by Case. We want to just take a moment and remind you that this content is intended for adult audiences. It is created for educational and informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as discussions may include references to real criminal cases, violence, and other sensitive and potentially distressing topics. While we strive to present every case with accuracy and respect those involved, the material may not be suitable for all viewers. Please proceed thoughtfully. And remember, if you need to take a step back, if you find something that concerns you, if you find it to be triggering and you need to take a step back, please do. You can join us whenever you're ready to come back. We'll leave the light on. Welcome to Case by Case, and today was day 5 of Colin Gray's trial. Now, he is the father of school shooter Colt Gray, who killed 4 people and injured several others back in 2024. Yeah, it was September 4th, 2024. Now, today was an interesting day because we really started to get into just how messed up this young man was. First of all, we heard, and I may not go through every single witness, but I'm going to go through the recap. What we heard is we had a crime scene analyst or crime scene tech who had gone through the house and taken pictures of everything. And of course, they had taken a lot of it as evidence. But what became apparent when they went through the house is that there were bullets laying everywhere. I mean, they were in the laundry room. They were in the dad's room. The dad shared a room with his youngest son. So the bullets were in there. The bullets were in Colt's room. So it was apparent that bullets were just laying around. Then you see there's 2 firearms in the dad's room, neither of which are secured. One of the other interesting things is that they did find the locks that you put through guns for safety purposes to keep them from being fired. They found them both, the one that belonged to the gun that Colt used in his shooting, and another one that belonged to a gun that was laying, I believe it was in the top of a closet in the dad's bedroom. Neither of those locks had been removed from their packaging. They still had the instructions in it about safety and how important it is to lock a gun down. So it was apparent that no safety precautions were taken. And what really stood out to me is that you had these guns laying around the house, and you also had a younger son and a daughter living there. And the younger son stayed in the dad's room with him. There were bunk beds. And this could have been even worse of a tragedy, or an additional tragedy, I should say, if that little boy or the daughter had gotten their hands on this. One of the interesting things is that when you walked down this hallway, it's a narrow hallway, and you got to Colt's room, if you looked in the door, the first wall you saw was this shrine to Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter. There was no avoiding it. It wasn't like you could not see it. And, in my mind, before they showed that today, my thinking was that it was probably just a few pictures on a bulletin board or something, or, like one of those court boards. No, this was a big, long area of things that had been printed out and then put up on the wall with thumbtacks. There was big pictures of Nicholas Cruz. There were newspapers articles about the shooting, information about, who all died. So, I mean, it was clearly a shrine. I mean, that's the way they were wording it, and that's exactly what it was. It was interesting to me that the defense never stopped them from using shrine. And they've got a very famous defense attorney, Jimmy Berry. I used to see him, I saw him a couple of times in trial way back, years and years ago. And he's a legend. I mean, he's just a phenomenal defense attorney. But I was surprised that he wasn't really objecting to a lot of the leading questions that the prosecutor was doing today. He didn't really object to all of the hearsay. I mean, there were a couple things that I was just like, why are you, I would not want this in. But, he knows what he's doing. So, I mean, I don't want to second guess a legend, but at any rate, there were a lot of interesting things. Okay, that was just the first part of it. So there was no denying that if you walked to that guy's room, you were going to see this stuff up on the wall. There was no denying that. Now, the question was, we don't know when that went up. But something that did become interesting is Colt had torn up his computer, had torn it apart. And it was laying in the floor, and you could see where the hard drive and other pieces of it had been pulled out. And it probably was, he may have been updating a graphics card, because there was testimony that I'll get to in a minute from the grandmother about him wanting a graphics card. So it could be that that's what he got and he was working on that. I couldn't really tell from the photos, but I think the point in them highlighting it is that if he printed off that information that he put up on his wall, the photos of Nick Cruz and the all of the news articles, and those did appear to be printed out. If they were printed out from his computer, and his computer had been in disarray and broken down since well before the shooting, then you got to wonder if that shrine had been up on the wall for a length of time. So they did a pretty good job of that. Now, they'll have to explain that to the jury when the time comes and link all that, because I don't know if everybody would have gotten it. So you had all of that. The biggest witness, I thought, by far today was the grandmother. It was the maternal grandmother. It was Colt's mom, Marcy. It was her mother. And when she testified, it became very apparent just how devastatingly affected this family was by the mom's drug and alcohol abuse. And it became apparent that the grandmother and grandfather had tried to do everything they could to help their daughter. They sent her to rehab. She didn't stay in rehab. They called defects on her, got the kids removed from her custody because of her abuse, alcohol abuse. But something that happened about a year before the shooting is the grandmother, the daughter was living in the grandmother's house. And I believe the kids had gone back to live with their father. The grandmother had been calling defects. Her and one of her other daughters had called defects on the mom more than once. But what happened in this situation is either the daughter was going through some withdrawals or she was hopped up on something. I couldn't really tell. But either way, she tied the grandmother, her own mother, to a chair and left her. And the grandmother stayed in that position, tied up, unable to move or leave, until a neighbor found her a day later. So, this grandmother knows what her daughter was capable of. And this is why the grandmother did not want the kids to be in the care of their mother when she was on that stuff. So one of the other questions that got answered is that yesterday I remember talking to you about there being no record for him going to the 8th grade. Well, apparently the grandmother was aware that there was a homeschooling program, but it wasn't an official one where he lived. And they did everything they needed to do, and then the school would send a packet home. Now, the grandmother, ironically, is a retired school teacher, and she worked in that system for 43 years and has a background in counseling. So she was able to help the kids with their homeschooling. So it's not like Colt did not get any education during the 8th grade at all, which is what it sounded like in the beginning. Okay, so the other interesting thing, the grandmother really was instrumental in explaining the dynamics in that family. She seemed to have a good relationship with the father, Colin. Why do I keep saying Colin? Anyway, Colin, well, because he's called Coley. His nickname is Coley. So all through the trial, they keep referring to him as Coley. And there's also a younger son that's named Coley. But at any rate, so Coley, or Colin, had a good relationship apparently with his mother-in-law or ex-mother-in-law or whatever. I don't know if they ever got, divorced or what. But at any rate, she would communicate some to him, but not a whole lot. So there were a lot of things that happened with Colt in relation to his grandmother that she said she never told his father about, which I thought was really unfortunate, because some of those things, they showed the text messages in court, and I couldn't believe how he was talking to his grandmother. Now, he claimed that he had some type of a mania and schizophrenia and some other things. But I don't know that he was ever diagnosed with that. But for some reason, he felt that that's what he had. And the family agreed that there was something going on. But they never actually made those steps to get him the crisis intervention that he apparently was asking for. He had been cutting on himself, but the grandmother described these arguments, and the text messages bore them out. And it was unbelievable the way that he spoke to her. If I had ever spoken to anyone in my family, let alone my grandmother, this way, I'm not sure I'd be here to tell the tale, because my father wouldn't have stood for it. So I was shocked that anybody, even under the circumstances of him having, all of the crazy moving back and forth, and his mom, his mom apparently really, when she got messed up on meth or was drinking heavily, she apparently was really ugly to the kids. And there was some back and forth about whether or not she was physically abusive to the kids, but that really never came out. So taking it back to what the state has to prove here, the state has proven that the crimes took place. Now they got to prove this knowledge that Coley, the father, Colin, knew that his son was having all of these episodes, had idolized a school shooter, was making threats, and still bought him a gun. Now, the grandmother did testify that the father bought a gun for him for Christmas, the Christmas before this happened. But what's interesting is the grandmother also bought him bullets. And I think there was a gun strap or something they talked about that she might have bought him. So, I mean, everybody in this kid's family seems to have really missed the mark on this. Now, the grandmother testified that she believed the biggest concern was that he was going to harm himself. She said it never dawned on her that he would hurt anyone else. She was concerned about him harming himself. And she called the crisis hotline. She called the local area to find out where he could go for crisis intervention. She went so far as to get answers, and pass them along to his dad to say, he can go in day or night. They'll see him day or night. You don't have to wait for an appointment. But for whatever reason, he never got there. And we don't really know at this point in the trial whether the dad was trying to take him and there were obstacles, or whether Colt was saying, no, I'm fine, I'm doing better. But the fact remains that to prove their case, if the state can put that knowledge on the dad, that the dad knew that he was having homicidal thoughts, that he had a shrine built up and idolized a school shooter. And I think that those things right there are going to be critical. But the one thing I kept thinking the whole time today is, how in the world could that father have walked down that hallway to his room, passing his son's room, at any point with the door open and open the door or whatever, and not seen those big posters up? Now, maybe he didn't know who it was. Maybe he just saw that. But why wouldn't he take the time to look at the newspapers articles and see why those are up there? I mean, was he thinking, I don't know who that guy is, and maybe he's got, just a crush on a guy, or, maybe that's just his hero, or maybe it's a musician. I don't know what the father was thinking. But if he walked past there and had any inkling, that's a huge, huge issue. And the other thing that makes me think is knowing that his son was having all these issues, and some of that did come out. Why in the world did he not make that crisis intervention a priority? I mean, everyone thinks it won't happen to me. It won't happen in our family. My kids would never do that. But your kids may never do that if you get them the right help. This child was absolutely having major issues. You just don't talk to your loved ones the way he was, cussing them and threatening to kill them and threatening to be done with them and, all of this stuff. You don't do that if you're hitting on all cylinders. You just don't. So, while some of it can be chalked up to teenage angst and, going through all these changes and stuff, I still don't know that there was ever a point that he should have talked to anybody that way, said any of those things. It amazes me. The defense did get a few points in. They got in that the grandmother did not discuss. Oh yeah, that's something. she talked about Colt bringing up Nicholas Cruz. And she said she thought they were at a McDonald's for some reason. And that she didn't even know how the conversation went. Or maybe they were on their way to a McDonald's or something. She said she didn't even know how the conversation came up. But what happened is he brought up Nicholas Cruz. And she said, no, I don't know who that is. And Colt said, really? And she said, yeah. And he said, do you know about the Parkland school shooting? She said, well, yeah, I know about that. But she didn't know who the person was that had done the shooting. Because like so many people, she probably heard about it, followed it, but, didn't know anything about who did it. So he went on talking about Nicholas Cruz quite a bit. But she didn't put it together that he idolized him. She didn't, I don't think it really came across that way. Think about it. Depending on how he said it, it could have sounded just like some interest or something he read in school or something he heard about or whatever. Or it could have been something that, true crime people are interested in because it's so appalling and shocking. So she just didn't really know. But for whatever reason, that never got mentioned to his dad. A lot of the things that I noticed through today is that although she did communicate with the dad, and although she was dealing with all these issues with his mom, she clearly loved her grandkids. There's no doubt about it. But it seems like she just didn't pass along every little thing. And some of those little things were big things. And as a parent, she, as a grandparent, she might have been thinking, look, he's got his own things going on. Because one of the things also that came out, I keep remembering these little things because it was so much today. One of the things that happened is her daughter, Marcy, Colt's mom, got all messed up on something and went and was going and told her she was going to kill Colt and his dad. Well, she got on the phone and that's when she tied her up. Remember, I told you that she tied the mom up. So she switched out the license plate numbers from her mom and her own vehicle, and then drove her vehicle because it had her mom's license plates, because for some reason her vehicle had been flagged or something because of her drug abuse or alcohol abuse or something. They didn't go into detail about that other than that it had been flagged. So she actually drove up there, but the grandmom apparently had gotten in touch with him, texted him or something. I don't know. There was a little bit of confusion because, first of all, she was very soft-spoken. And apparently the prosecutor could hear her because he just kept moving right along, even though several times during the trial people said, pull the mic closer, pull the mic closer. There were times the defense attorney said that. So I wasn't sure if this was the tied-up incident, but at any rate, Marcy went up there and keyed his company car. He had a company truck where he worked, and it got him fired. So the grandmother then helped him get a new vehicle for work. So that's what I mean. I mean, there was a closeness there, a willingness of the grandmother and the grandfather to help the mom and the dad and the grandkids. But nothing seemed to be working, and the communications just seemed to be, I don't know if it's because the grandmother thought, well, they've got so much going on. Here he is, he's lost his job. He's trying to get a job, or he's gotten a new job. I don't want him to get fired. Here my daughter is, she's got all these problems. I don't want all this going on. So it's hard to know exactly why that breakdown happened. But I'm sure that it was a difficult situation for the grandmother. Um, there was somebody else that came up after the grandmother, but the grandmother was such a she was such a big part of today's testimony that there wasn't really anything else critical. Let me see. They did introduce a lot of emails and text messages, but they made a comment that those are going to be addressed through a different witness. So they did the introduction of them on the record and entered them into evidence and laid the foundation. They did that with something yesterday. So I think there's going to be more things that are coming. There have to be more things that are coming that are going to link the dad. Because right now, I don't know. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't think so. I don't think we're there. I really don't. And let me make it clear. I'm all for holding a parent responsible if they have a knowledge and they fail to act, they fail to prevent. That's just an absolutely horrible situation. So, if he really was that kind of father that just truly believed his kids and tried to give them the benefit of the doubt and was trying to do the best he could and did not know about the shrine in his room to the Parkland shooter and did not know about his propensity wanting to harm other people, then that's one thing. But I just don't see how he couldn't have seen the shrine, and I don't see how he couldn't have known all of these things were wrong. I mean, remember we talked about yesterday the police officer coming to the front porch and alerting him of a Discord conversation where Colt allegedly was the one that said, I'm going to shoot up a school, or I'm going to be a school shooter. So it's just interesting. It's interesting. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Now, today is Friday. They got out just a little bit early. So I think they're coming back on Monday, and we'll pick this up on Monday. But I wanted to give you today's recap so that you would be all caught up to date as much as I could think about. I'm trying to look at my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't think I did. I do want to just reiterate, though. The father faces 55 charges, including malice and felony murder, and that's why they had to prove murder. Aggravated assault, and that's why they had to prove those other charges. Aggravated battery, again, that's why they had to prove that. And cruelty to children. So all of those things have been proven. They've gone through all the motions on the prosecution to do all of that. Now they're down to what did the mother know? What did the father know? Not necessarily the mother, but what did the father know? Okay, this is Case by Case, and I will talk to you next week when we do additional recaps of this case.